welcome back. I'm here with Lacey Keller Smith. She is a wildland fire wife, and we are here to talk about the culture of fire families and how they are different, but they intersect on many levels. And so, welcome to the show, Lacey.
Hey, thanks, Chelsea. So, like you said, I'm a wildland firefighter's wife. My husband works for the Forest Service right now. We've been doing this for about 4 years. Before that, he worked for little city department that did call them wildland deployments at the time, similar to a strike team. And then before that, he was a EMT on an ambulance. He has a degree in public health with an emphasis in emergency management. So this has been our life. And a few years ago now, we made a decision to come to wildland, and that has been an adventure. There were a lot of things that I thought I was prepared for that I wasn't, and a lot of opportunities that I realized I had skills because of my past experience that I would not have had if I'd come into it brand new. Those things, along with some things that we're dealing with pay, I connected with some other firewives, and together we started a nonprofit called Fired Up. And our goal is really to educate people about wildland firefighting, educate Congress, because we're reliant on them as federal employees, and then provide the support structure that wildland families need to just get through another fire season, another day, another role, another whatever, and help provide some of that support structure that just doesn't exist.
So, tell me a little bit about how that's happening. What are you currently working on with Fired Up?
Our big project right now is a handbook for families. There is a handbook that is published by the federal agencies that talks about what it's like for a firefighter and provides about 1 page for wildland families, and it's fully inadequate. You can tell that they were trying to think about us, but they didn't talk to the people that would have given them the subject matter expertise to actually provide something that was helpful. And so many of the resources that are available speak to the firefighter's experience, which is helpful as a family member in supporting your firefighter, but it's not helpful for the firefighter in supporting the family, or as a parent to figure out how to support a child, or as a father trying to support a household, and understand what it's like to be a wildland family and how from the outside looking in, you can care for them. It doesn't even provide things like how to wash a wildland clothing so that it doesn't contaminate your own family's clothing. So that's our big push right now. We have something that is in pretty close to final draft stage. We expect to release that this spring. It's been a labor of love, and we're really excited about it.
I'm really excited that that's happening because I feel like that's going to rub off on some other agencies that could really use the same thing. So I don't want to go from there. Well, that totally stopped me in my tracks. I did not expect that at all. So as you can see, this is not a scripted podcast. We are in real time, and I am flabbergasted. So bravo to you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate you so much for that. So let me ask you this. From that work, what would you say is the painfulest pain point that we need to educate our families on?
I think we are all very lonely. I think the biggest takeaway is that we all feel very isolated. We all feel like there's inadequate resources, there's not enough support, and there's not any clarity as to where we fit in the broader world. And it's because it's so difficult for outsiders to understand this life. Whether or not you have a community depends a lot on what you come into this with, what you're able to maintain through this, whether or not you're at a duty location that supports community, and whether or not you're lucky enough to find resources online that feel like community. And so we're all living a similar experience, but nobody's talking about it except sort of vaguely online. There are a couple of groups specifically for wildland families, but it's not organized. Whether or not you have support and community at the station level depends a lot on your leadership. And the demands aren't the same across the board, even within the Forest Service, but they're similar enough that we have shared context and shared experience, but we don't have shared connection. And that lack of shared connection makes us feel very isolated.
We feel the same way with my husband's agency. Although it's not federal, it's a state agency. California is so big and so diverse that it's really hard to establish those connections, especially since a lot of the guys are traveling from somewhere to go to work that's not near the station, and it is really isolating. And so unless you're really plugged in and you have a unit that is very family oriented, and this varies from unit to unit, that is definitely tough. Talk to me a little bit about that. What is the wildland schedule, or what have you experienced?
I laugh because the wildland schedule is unpredictable and wildly varied. So our standard off-season base schedule is 5/8, which frankly stinks. It's all of the worst parts of an office job plus all of the worst parts of a fire job. During prescribed burns, or if your unit feels like it and wants to have that discussion with leadership, your spouse might work 4/10s. Then fire season kicks in, and this varies across the country. Like right now, it's fire season in the Southeast. Where I am, my husband is completely off work right now. He's in furlough status because the temperature is too cold. We don't have fire activity. So he's home all the time, right? Which is awesome. But during fire season, they still work eights. He starts later in the day. He gets extended a lot. So he's supposed to be off at 6 p.m. I don't see him a lot of times till 9 p.m. I just assume that he's working 9:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. 5 days a week. And then they go to 6 day a week scheduling. So then he works for 6 days and he's off for one. He will come home in the evening and still be on call. So they work 5 or 6 days a week when there's not a fire going on. And then when the fire goes, they're gone 14 days minimum. Sometimes the fire's out in 2 days. So he'll work 2 days and then he'll come home and shower and say hi and then go back to work the next day like it's a normal work day. When he's on a 14-day assignment, it's never actually 14 days. It's at least 16 because travel days don't count as part of that 14-day. So if the location that they're being sent to is a day of travel away, then it's 16 days. If it's 2 days of travel away, it's 18 days. Then he takes 3 days of R&R and he's back to his regular 5 day a week, 10 hour a day ish, however long they want to keep him. And then he comes home and has a regular couple of days off and then goes back to work, and then they catch a fire and he's gone for 14 days, 16 days, 18 days. They can go up to 21. It doesn't happen very often. The whole crew has to agree to be extended for 21 days. And there's not always the willingness, but there's often not the demand for it in today's current environment, at least for my husband. My husband's on an engine, and his experience is going to be different than on a hand crew. And there are two types of hand crews. There's the hot shots, and they much more work at 21 as far as I understand, but we've never done hot shots, so I can't really speak to that. And this is where this goes back a little bit to where I say we're all having similar experiences, but it's different. It's different even within the same station because they're different types of resources. They're used in different ways across the agency, and so the experience is different. So what I'm experiencing is not the same thing as what another firewife is experiencing within the same agency, within the same forest, within the same station. But the broader experience is the same, and we can relate to that broader experience together.
So there's no station life going on with wildland?
Not locally. When my husband was on the Angeles National Forest in LA, they have barracks that have crew that stays there. Most of them are temporary employees who are hotshots or are hand crew that's hired for the peak of fire season, and they stay there mostly out of necessity. There's no place for my husband to sleep at the station, and because of where we are locally, there's no need for that. We have really good wildland cooperators. So if there's a fire, those municipal stations will pick up the fire initially in a lot of cases. And then the federal crews get called to support because it's not federal land right up against city. It's usually state land or city land right up against the city. The wildland urban interface is not federal responsibility. That doesn't mean that they don't do a lot of response on that land. We cooperate a lot. When they stay places, where they're staying is a fire camp somewhere in the middle of Utah or Wyoming or New Mexico or wherever.
When it's just a regular day with no fires, it's 8 hours, come home.
Yeah. Actually, in the summertime, it's a lot of 10s and 12s. And that's actually the hardest part because he'll come home right about the same time I'm trying to get kids to bed. they'll want to see him. He's tired. He wants to drop his clothes and go to bed. And then the next day he gets up and leaves. Everybody stayed up late because they wanted 5 minutes with dad. He's out the door by 9, and we don't see him again until 10 p.m. Rinse and repeat for 3 weeks in a row. And a lot of those times they're working 6 days a week.
Only relate to you saying this because my husband worked 12-hour shifts for 8 years of our marriage. He was in communications, and that shift was a 12-hour shift. He worked an hour away from where we lived. So he would get up, he would leave at 6 a.m., and he wouldn't be home until 8 p.m. that evening, right?
Yeah.
And that's assuming that he doesn't have some call going on and he's leaving late and whatever. So he would get home, the kids would be, really excited to see dad, but he was working nights. So he was working for a little while he worked days, but for the most part he worked nights. So it was 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. and try to keep your kids quiet so dad can sleep when he gets home. Like, forget
Yeah.
that. That's not going to happen. So he got real good about being able to sleep with earplugs and all of that stuff. But let me tell you, those 12-hour shifts are rough. I would literally take a 48-hour shift over a 12-hour shift any day of the week.
I mean this without any sense of meanness, but I have been reminded recently with all of the posts from my structure friends and you, a couple of other people that I follow on Instagram, um, speaking to our experience. He never works Christmas as a wildland firefighter. And I have had a little bit of, oh yeah, at least we don't work Christmas. um,
Right?
because I look at structure families and I look at CAL FIRE and go, I would love so much to go back to 24s. Even, the 24 on, 24 off, that shift is not awesome, but I would love that. I would love 48 on, 72 off. I don't get that ever. And even when he comes home 16 or 18 days later, he gets 3 days off. And those 3 days are laundry, their bills, their, hey, I broke this thing and I sat on the floor and I cried for 2 hours trying to fix it. And then I had to quit. And now I need you to fix it. And you have 3 days here. The chances are that I'm working because I
Mhm.
can't just take off the 3 days every time he comes home. And we certainly can't afford this life if I'm not also working. We have to have my income. I know a lot of structure firefighters have a second job. That's not an option for federal wildland families. We can't do that. He could get a job in the winter, but then he's gone. And the only time that I have to work on projects, he's out in my yard right now building me raised garden beds because I can't garden in the ground another year. And that's a thing that I want to do for me. It's part of who I am as a person. I would lose all of that time if he also was working a second job. And so we have to make these hard decisions about how we spend basically 3 days of time off caring for the essentials. And then things like staying connected as a family end up at the bottom of the list, not because they're not important or because we don't want them to take priority, but because they literally can't be more important than like, hey, here's a stack of bills you need to pay attention to. Hey, here's the thing that's broken. Hey, you have to wash 2 weeks of laundry and repack it so that you're ready for your next assignment. And those things add up. It's this really tricky balance of how do we stay together as a family unit and also not let the things that have to be done fall apart.
It's true. All summer, my husband would come home. He'd be off for his 3 days, and we had a leak in our bathroom. And all summer, he'd work his 3 days. He'd come home and work for 3 days on the bathroom. I have a new bathroom now,
Yay.
but the family time was limited because you can only do so much in 3 days if you're taking time to also spend time with the family. And so we could either have this bathroom project go on for 6 months, or if he could focus on it for 9 hours a day and have that be his job while he was home. Essentially, you said it so well. You can either pay your bills or you can spend time with your family, or you can fix the leaky faucet or you can spend time with your family. It's always this balancing act of how much can I get done versus how much family time can we have? And it's a really hard balance to strike.
I don't think any of us are great at it because I don't think it's set up in a way that any of us can be good at it. Like there are no good options. It's just how good are you at managing a bad situation?
Right. And that's interesting that you said that there's no good options, and I think it's designed that way. It's designed that way on purpose. I mean, this is my question that I've been asking for like a year now. How can you fix it? The system can't be fixed. It's unfortunate, but it can't.
Not within the framework that we have. And even if you were to rebuild the framework, some of this would be inherent. None of our husbands are going to be like, no, I can't go to this fire because I want to play mini golf with my kids. I want to preface this by saying that this is not an example of me being a martyr. It's just an example of the level of what we manage. And I'm not suggesting anybody follow my example here. I tripped one night while my husband was on a fire assignment, and I rolled my ankle and I broke my foot. And I went to the emergency room. I had it checked out. They gave me a prognosis. It was like, it's a minor break. There's nothing that can be done about it. We could do surgery, but it probably will heal on its own. Just wear shoes and be careful. I waited till I had all of that information before I sent a text to my husband that said, hey, when you are free, give me a call. And I was like, hey, I just want you to know I broke my foot. You don't need to come home. There's nothing to do about it. We're fine. I had broken bones, and it was literally like, meh, we'll deal. And I've told people outside of fire this story. And they're like, why didn't you call your husband home? And it's like, there was no reason for him to come home. There was no reason. There was nothing he could do. I didn't want to pull him from the work that he was doing just to come babysit me. And that's what it takes to bring a firefighter home. It's got to be something that we can't deal with on our own. They can't wait till they're off their fire. And that for us is just really run of the mill. I don't know any wildland family that doesn't have a story that's at least that level of mine. And many of them are much more severe than mine before they call their spouse and they're like, hey, I'm really sorry to pull you off the fire line, but we are in crisis and everything is burning and we can't do this by ourselves. And I don't know how we could restructure the system to not create that dynamic. I do think there are a lot of things we could do within the existing system to make it slightly less painful. One of the things that a friend of mine suggested a few years ago is 5 days off after assignments. So he works 16 to 18, and then he's home for 5. The problem with that is it requires more staffing. More staffing requires more funding. More funding requires people in DC. I don't have to convince a legislature or a governor. I have to convince all of Congress, or I have to convince the head of a federal agency that
But I
won't
think it's
sit
just as difficult to convince a governor. I mean, not that I have to go to Congress, but I think across the board, having to speak with any government agency is going to be difficult no matter how you slice it. You
Right.
might spend a lot more time. It's like hitting your head against a brick wall, ask our union, because they don't get it any more than the general populace gets it.
Right.
They're not living it, so they don't understand it. And let's just be honest, few of them were public servants in that kind of an environment. And so what do they have to go off of? A piece of paper that tells them all of these facts, and maybe they believe them and maybe they don't.
Wildland firefighters want to go work in the woods. They want to be invisible. They want to do their job. They don't want to be front and center. They don't want lots of accolades. The problem is that invisibility contributes to the kinds of environments where then they are taken advantage of. And then by extension, their families are taken advantage of. And so there's this really uncomfortable relationship between wildland firefighters and their families and the requirements of visibility that allow us to get our needs met. And that tension for a long time, I think, resulted in a lot of broken homes, a lot of people just putting their head down and dealing with it and not talking about how hard it was. And now we're at this kind of crisis point where the federal agencies can't hire enough people, which puts more strain back on state agencies who are not equipped by and large to handle it. And city agencies, those agencies are pushing back and being like, hey, we can't actually put out fires on federal land for a lot of reasons. You have to staff better. But then the people in charge at the federal agency level have not been firefighters. They don't know what it's like. They can't communicate well to Congress. Congress doesn't understand. We don't speak well enough. The general public doesn't understand. And so then we are spending all of this time trying to educate to get our needs met, but without any sort of ability to even talk to each other, to talk to the spouses, even within our own forest. In some cases, because we're spread way, way, way far apart. In some places, because there are just a couple of us on any forest, because a majority of our staff is temporary and they don't have families or they don't have families that come with them. In my case, we're on an urban forest. I'm in Utah, and there are 300 Forest Service employees in the greater metro area. We just sort of disappear. So we're not really that important to the community the way that our city fire department is. And so there's just this massive lack of understanding of who we are and what we do. And why we're important and why we need attention. And that creates conditions where nobody is looking at our families. And because nobody's looking at our families, we can't fix the problems.
We have the same issues. It's a little bit more complex, I think, because for us it's Schedule A and Schedule B. So Schedule B is your wildland, gonna go out on the fires kind of thing, and then Schedule A is more stations and that more municipal interface. And so the schedules vary, number 1. The experiences vary, number 2. Nobody understands the difference and the impact that it has at home on one side or the other because, "Oh, I'm at my station and I love it here and I have my 48-hour shift and now I go home for my 3 days and maybe I catch some holdovers." That's Schedule A. Schedule B is I'm gone all summer because I have a fire that I have to be on every other day. Like,
Yeah.
it's completely 2 different worlds, and rarely do they intersect. And so it's this misconception between both of those sides. And then also, how do you, as a government, make it the same?
Yeah.
And then how do you reach both families in both experiences without conflating issues? And so that's where I think it gets really tough, for us at least. And then I also think that, again, convincing government that there's an issue at all is like trying to pull teeth and, it's is what it is. And
Yeah.
so you're right, we're left to our own devices. My experience is going to be different than your experience, and your experience is going to be different than somebody else's experience. And while we can kind of relate to some of it, it's hard for someone who hasn't had their spouse gone for 14 days at a time to understand what that's like and what it looks like inside the home. It's hard for me to contemplate how the 48 hours on and then the 96 off or whatever it is, um, how that fits into my dynamic. So you're right. At least I had Christmas off, that's kind of what you're looking at. Oh, it could be worse.
To that point, we have Christmas off because my husband is furloughed for the winter and because we're on a forest that has minimal activity during the winter time. Now, I don't know how that's going to change over time because we've had very little snow this year. Honestly, if somebody went up into the mountains and started a fire, they might call them all back. Last year felt incredibly hard to me because of those fires in California. It felt like we never got a break. We never got a breath. And my husband didn't end up getting recalled, but there was discussion about whether or not they were going to recall him. And he had academy. And so his 8 pay periods off were not 8 pay periods off. I think it was 6. But during those 6, it was phone calls from the crews and trying to figure out whether or not we were going to send folks down to California. And I don't actually know what ended up happening, only that he wasn't recalled. But we have Christmas off, but not all fire families have that 8 weeks off in the wintertime. Increasingly, they are moving towards what we call 26-0. So you're on for 26 pay periods and off for 0 pay periods. He works in 18-8. There are a few 13-13s. It just means how many weeks you're in pay status. And some of those firefighters at the federal level, we're still out fighting fires on Christmas. And that's one of the things as the federal fire service modernizes. And we are in this really unpredictable time where the DOI agencies are being combined. There's negotiations with the Forest Service and the DOI about where they're putting fire, if they're going to try to move all of the Forest Service firefighters over to DOI. I don't know, and I can't control it. And it has an outsized impact on my life. And nobody's asking any of the partners.
Nope.
Nobody's saying, "Hey, how do we do this in a way that doesn't totally wreck family life?" And we have to get kind of assertive with grassroots wildland firefighters, with NIFI, who's our union, to make sure that our voices are being heard, but they don't actually have to represent us. So it's just whether or not they want to. And we have some really good relationships with grassroots and with NIFI, but their agendas are not the same as fire family agendas. They have to look at things differently than we as spouses are looking at things. And as the fire agencies modernize, as long as we stay really narrow focused on what our experience is, it's going to be really hard for us to come up with things that work more broadly within the agency. And of course, nobody's asking our opinion. They don't care.
Something similar happened with ours. They went to a 56-hour work week. And what happens when you do that is that there's a shift change. They're rotating the shifts back and forth. So, how does that second breadwinner, like in our case, I stay at home and I'm an entrepreneur. So, I don't have a work schedule that's 9 to 5. So, it didn't affect me. But there were so many families that were like, I'm going to have to quit my job. I can't go to work in this unpredictable landscape. And then on top of that, if I were to pay for childcare for all of this, I'd have to pay for 5 days a week of childcare in order to go to work. And it's going to cost me more to do that than it is to stay home. So here we are between this rock and a hard place. And nobody said, how is this going to work for the family? It was just, this is what we're going to do because it works for the firefighters.
Yeah. If I could sit down and talk to leadership at any level, one of the things that I would say to them is if you make decisions without keeping families in mind, at some point you're going to lose families, which means you're going to lose firefighters that are committed to their families. And honestly, I think a lot of the attrition within the federal fire service is because increasingly the workforce was like, we can't keep doing this. And they are choosing their families over fires and they're leaving. And if you would sit down with the families, we have a family mental health subcommittee that has no family, like it has firefighters on it who have families, but it doesn't have family members. And we're all having similar enough experiences that we could bring suggestions and ideas and workshop and dialogue. And in absence of that, I think we're getting better at doing that on our own. You and I are having this conversation. I have friends scattered all over the country. Locally, a couple of other firewives and I are saying we can't keep being isolated. We need to figure out how to have more interaction through the year and have these relationships. And my husband's station is fairly good at that. We have an activity in the spring and we have a Christmas party, but we get invites to things like, oh, Smokey's birthday party or something like that. But we drove an hour and a half to go to the station where my husband's crew was for Smokey's birthday party because we hadn't seen him. And it was a family event. That's a long way for a family to drive, especially if you have young kids. So I'm like, please open the station, like invite us in. Let's have some station family life. Bringing us in and helping us connect with each other helps us create a stable life where then we can send our firefighters out and still have somebody to call when we trip and break our foot or something. And that would be the takeaway that I would say to any leadership is just open your doors and bring the families in. Make time and space in the early season, at the end of the winter when everybody's just doing paperwork, bring families in and help us connect with each other. And in absence of that, don't be afraid as a spouse. Talk to your partner about what you're experiencing. Help them understand when they send you that text message, hey, I'm going on a fire. I don't know when I'll be back. At least for me, my brain goes into, okay, now I'm on my own for 48, 72 hours, 3 weeks, who knows? So now I'm already rearranging, who do I need to call to help get my kids home from school? Who do I need to reach out to? What am I saying to work? How am I adjusting my schedule? Do I need to rearrange appointments? Do I need to call and cancel his appointments? All of that is happening while he's driving 2 hours to a fire to find out that the state put it out and that he's been canceled. And so then he's like, "Hey, we got canceled. I'm coming home." Now I'm doing the same thing in reverse. Okay, I'm adjusting to him being back. We have to talk to our firefighters about that experience. We have to help them understand. And then we have to say, "Hey, I'm feeling really lonely. Can I have so and so's phone number? Can you ask these people if I can have their partner's phone numbers? And then let's get together and reach out." You don't all have to be friends. You might not all like each other. That's okay. But you've got to find people who understand. And it's helpful if at least some of them can be local. It's not enough to just have online because we can't show up and drop soup or whatever. But we have to be assertive as spouses. We have to be able to speak for ourselves and say, "This is what I need," and then push our firefighter partners to help us get what we need. Their brains are wired for emergencies. And unless it feels like an emergency for them, it's really easy to get on the back burner and never actually get what we need because they'll deal with it in a minute later, whatever, when it's on fire.
When the bathroom's leaking, that's when we'll get fixed, right? When the water is pouring down downstairs, that's when it will get addressed. So 100% agree with all of that. That was fantastic. So to that point, we live 4.5 hours away from my husband's station. And like you, I will do the drive if it's for something really important, like a retirement party. We did a there and back in one day for a retirement party recently. It was brutal, but it was great. My kids are teenagers, so it's not that big of a deal. They're like, "Oh yeah, road trip, cool, let's go." A 4.5 hour drive for Smokey's birthday party. So anyway, we make those sacrifices and we do the drives. But you're right, and I've been saying this for a decade now. There needs to be a way to get everybody in a room more than once a year.
Our forest put on a mental health seminar during our preseason. They call it a rodeo. It's everybody in the same room getting all of their certs and everything, making sure that they're all prepped for the season. The firefighters there kept saying, "I wish that my spouse knew this. I wish that my spouse knew this." And so towards the end of the season, they put on another meeting for us, but it was all virtual. So we didn't have a chance to talk to each other. It was great because then everybody could go, but it didn't give us an opportunity to network. And it talked a lot about what the firefighter was experiencing, but not about what we were experiencing and not about how the dynamic that they were experiencing impacted families beyond like, this might cause conflict in your marriage because of fight or flight response. All of that was really helpful and also left out a huge portion of the experience, which is how the spouse is responding. Like, I know if my husband comes home and he's keyed up and he's frustrated because they haven't been on a fire in 3 weeks and they drove out somewhere and got canceled halfway, all of that adrenaline came and then he hasn't dealt with it. And then also, I'm really grumpy because my teenager has been a pain in the neck and my elementary school kid is sad she's not sitting at a table with any of her other friends and her teacher has moved her 4 times and all of that. And then work has been stressful for me. He comes home, he's short-tempered. I'm mad. I'm mad at the Forest Service because he's been canceled 3 times and has not had a fire. Like, and that's not their fault. It's just the situation. But also, I'm starting to stress about money and I'm starting to worry about how the back end of our season will go. All of those things. He walks in, he says something short tempered, and it blows up because he's dysregulated and I'm dysregulated. And I haven't talked to anybody about all of the feelings. And it's great to know what's going on in his brain. And I can take a step back and walk things back and go, okay, literally, this is not worth fighting about. But does he know what my experience is in a way that he can also take a breath and walk it back a little bit and realize that I'm not dealing with literal fires, but I am dealing with emotional fires and financial fires and pragmatic fires in our life. And all of that's sitting on me because I don't know when he's leaving again. So I can't plan and prepare in any way for him to take care of any of these things. And so I think it's really important for fire families to be very vocal about their experience and with their spouses be able to communicate this is the experience. And then also to be able to have friends in the agency to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. And for them to be like, oh, girl, no, that is bad leadership. Or to be like, yeah, that's pretty normal and you're just going to have to get used to it. That's how we keep each other safe and sane.
And for management to understand that all of that is vacillating, it's not a reflection necessarily on the agency, because I think that's a lot of times too where it gets a little dicey, is that the management thinks, oh, well, these wives are all just sitting around talking crap about us. And like, that's not really what's going on. What's really going on is that we're all experiencing something and none of us have words for it because none of us have been talking about it for the last eon. And here we are now deciding that we're going to put language to it and we're going to have a shared experience. And so that's scary because what happens with that? Something changes
Yeah.
and change is bad, right? God forbid we've done something the same way for 100 years. So don't change it.
The two things firefighters hate most are the way that things are and change.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. 100%. So I think we've covered it. Is there anything else you want to add before we?
I hope that this has been valuable and that fire families, whether you're CAL FIRE or a structure family or a wildland family, I think we're all living similar ish experiences. And I think that it's good to talk to each other and have those conversations and be more visible and be more vocal. I understand there's this bias against making it your identity, and it's really easy for people to feel like you're making it your identity. I have a few times joked to people that the most interesting part about me is not my husband's job, but I spend an enormous amount of my life talking about my husband's job because people are curious, because they are trying to understand our experience, because people care. And it's not that it's my identity, it's just that it takes up so much space in my life. It takes up an enormous amount of room, and everything that I do, all of the decisions I make, down to like where my kids take dance, is driven by what I can reasonably accommodate alongside my husband's job. So, does building a life around the demands of my husband's job make it my identity? I don't know. But I also don't know what our life would be without that. I don't know who we would be as a family without that, because it is such a critical part of who we are. And part of surviving it means embracing how we show up. It means embracing what we can do. It means embracing that we are going to drive 90 minutes for Smokey's birthday, and my husband's captain is going to think that's kind of weird because his family wouldn't do that. But it's about giving my kids what they need. And it's about their pride in their dad's job. And it's about framing it like we are making sacrifices so that your dad can go serve other people. That is part of our identity. That is part of our family fabric. And we can't be so afraid of it being our whole personality or our identity. We minimize it because when we minimize it, then we tend to gaslight ourselves. And then we tend to accept less than what is reasonable. And then we tend to become martyrs and we don't speak up until everything is bad. And that's when relationships break down. Like, I took myself to a hotel for 2 days right before Christmas. I didn't have time to take myself to a hotel for 2 days right before Christmas, but I was mean. I was mean to everybody all the time. And Christmas sucked and the world was awful. And I couldn't be patient with anybody because the back half of our season was so demanding and I was so spent. And recognizing that and being like, "Hey, I'm out for a couple of days." Instead of letting it build to the point where I was ruining Christmas, we have to be able to voice issues before they blow up. But in order to do that, we have to acknowledge how much of our life is required by being part of the fire service. And it's not him that's part of the fire service, it's our whole family.
And we can't allow other people to tell us that we're weird because it's part of our identity.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, like we schedule our entire lives around that because we have to. It's survival.
Mhm.
Our lives are not the same as a 9 to 5 job. It's really hard for somebody to understand that who doesn't live it.
When I talk to my friends who live outside of fire and I say, I feel like we spend this whole conversation talking about how hard my life is because of my husband's job, they go, oh no, it's really interesting. And I don't know how you handle it. And they are generous and kind. Sometimes it feels like when I'm talking to generic fire spouses broadly, they're like, oh, well, you just go on with your life. It's like,
Mm,
I
mm,
mean, and
mm.
I feel like it's a little bit easier if you're a 48-96 type schedule.
Has its challenges too, though. I mean, I don't know if I'd love that disruption every 48 hour,
Mm.
you know?
If something touches every bit of my life, then it is part of my identity. It's not my whole identity, but it is fundamentally part of who I am.
Well, and I think if we resist it, it just makes things worse.
Yeah.
Just this is part of my identity. It impacts every part of my life, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not weird, and I don't care what Susie firefighter says about it. It doesn't matter. And if we never share our experiences, then nothing ever changes. And we don't ever feel like we have anyone we can relate to. So we're all isolated and in this on our own by
Mhm.
ourselves.
Yeah. Spousal isolation. Our our partners are not isolated. Our partners have a crew, they have people, they have shared experiences, and they have to, but they get to spend 2 weeks together, and then they're off, and then 2 weeks together. My husband's crew sees him more than he sees me, more than I see him for, like, 6 months out of the year. They are not isolated, but we are, and when we're isolated and we're relying on them as our only connection to the world that touches every bit of our lives, that breaks down families. It breaks down trust. It makes us less resilient. It makes it so that we can't communicate with our kids very well. They are isolated. It breaks down their relationship with their parent. It puts us in the position of being all things to our children. And so we have to recognize that our spouses are not isolated. Our spouses have community. We have to not rely on them as our only point of contact to this community. We have to build our own community. We have to be willing to say, this is part of who I am. And I need people who this is part of who they are as well. We just have to have that.
How do people find Fired Up?
So you can reach out to us at info@fireduppartners.com, or you can find our Instagram. And we've been fairly quiet there. Janelle is in the middle of a double master's program, but we're still working and we're still really responsive to messages. So please reach out to us. We'd love to have you be part of our community. We're also on Facebook. We have a community there.
You guys have a wonderful website. I found out everything I wanted to know. Very easy, very user friendly, very good.
Oh, yay. I really appreciate that. We are eager to connect with you. We're eager to help build community. Our organization is specifically designed for advocacy for the improvement of wildland families.
Love it. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you, Chelsea.